Good afternoon. I hope you have your coffee, tea.
Yes, I have had my tea, green tea and chamomile tea mixed. It's beautiful. I'm all ready.
Well, it gives me the greatest pleasure to have a conversation amidst many conversations that I have, but this is very special, and that it's somebody that I've known for so long and I consider my best friend, although I don't know if he feels the same. Maybe sometimes he wonders.
You're the only person I can check things with in the whole
Yeah.
world. When
Well,
I'm confused, I call you.
there's that saying, Jesus said, "They're my friends, for they know what I think." And so if anybody knows what I think, it's this gentleman right here, Douglas Gabriel from American Intelligence Media. Him and his dear, industrious wife, the incomparable Tyler Gabriel. Between the two of them, they've managed to uh, put out a network of information that's in some regards unparalleled, especially since working with Michael McKibben at Americans for Innovation. And so they've been able to give you kind of the deeper understory, because there are people out there that want to look beneath the veneer, and anything that you're going to get through any form of mass media, even if it's not straight up outright falsehoods, it doesn't go deep enough. And so consequently, we've been quite effective over the last few years of being able to point at problem areas before other people. And especially with Douglas and Tyler, they're like this hub of informed activity. But there's another side to this equation, and that's the idea of sovereignty, and how sovereignty is the actual antidote to all the challenges that mankind is having to face in this era of challenge. I mean, it's almost incomprehensible. You get more news in a day now than you used to get in a month. And so it's you almost have to make a career. He's saying no sound. Well, Elizabeth, turn on your sound. We have sound. And so consequently, where was I? And so check my settings. No, it's not my settings, it's yours. It's anyways, I can't continue on that. There's definitely sound here because I am looking and the sound is on and my sound is on. Douglas has his muted because I'm talking. Okay, where was I? So getting back to our narrative here is trying to give people something that they can work with in the realm of imagination, inspiration, and intuition, and being able to form a bridge to those wholesome powers that are guiding mankind, but yet they don't want to force their way in because it has to do with the issue of sovereignty and the fact that an individual truly freezes, uh, truly. They start again when you get your broadcast sounds. Well, I don't know what to say. But it truly freezes to take part in that which is good, and that doesn't always stay the same. So that you have to be able to think on your feet, because at one time you might think that a particular individual or institution is serving the good, and yet they turn a corner and all of a sudden they've switched teams, it appears. Or maybe they were on that other team all along and they were just playing the great game, which we've discussed on numerous occasions. So, in any event, you have to be able to maintain something that's above the fray. So, speaking of being above the fray, Douglas, how you doing there?
Well, I'm in the fray, and all I have to do is walk down the street to see that we are in unprecedented times. I'm a pretty old man. I've never seen anything like it, and it's all about sovereignty. And you've hit it because you named it the good, and that's where we have to go with this. If we're going to talk about sovereignty in America, you have to talk about the unalienable rights. Where'd they come from? According to the Constitution, from God. According to how it got there, well, we had some gentlemen, I guess we could call them, we could name them, who gave us this Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and gave us supposedly life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, John Locke had said life, liberty, and property. The French Revolution had said life, liberty, and freedom. Uh, and many others have a kind of a threefold view of what you have to have before you get to the good. The Greeks called it the true, the beautiful, and the good. And if something was really true, then it was probably beautiful. If it was beautiful, it could be good. But the catch there, catch 22, is beauty also insinuates power. And so you find the truth, and unfortunately, people turn it to the falsehood. We're actually in an age of falsehood where discernment is the key factor. And beauty, well, I think in America, we've done everything that a human can do to desecrate beauty. And we're seeing it now, even in the political, economic sphere. It's always been there. But with the beauty, if you have beauty and you know what it really is, then what you want to do is you want to bring that truth and beauty to everybody through the good, through action. And I am so glad you mentioned imagination and inspiration and intuition, because they all begin with the letter I. I am. Sovereignty in America belongs to your relationship to morality, called in our documents God. It's in all of our documents. It's in the Pledge of Allegiance. So we have to attempt to align exactly what you said, these forces of imagination, inspiration, intuition. And what are they? They're basically the three parts of the human being: thinking, feeling, and willing. But your I is not just your thinking. Your I am is not just your feeling, and it's not just your will. But if your thinking aligns with truth and your heart aligns with beauty, then hopefully your will can engage in the good. And that's the whole point of government, is to make sure that there is a body there to call forth the higher in us, not just to be there as a law enforcement or to tax us, but it's to call forth the higher. And Rudolf Steiner, of course, even after, I'm sorry to have to say, to the anthroposophist, Ralph Waldo Emerson had very clearly delineated what imagination, inspiration, and intuition were, and also other theosophists like A.E. It's something we could dwell on. Sovereignty is in the I am, and it's being taken away from us so dramatically all over the world. Not only the squelching of free speech through fact checkers that are paid for by, as Trump called them recently, very rich, stupid people. Very rich, stupid people, yes, they pay for the fact checkers, $1.5 billion from George Soros, the Atlantic Council. And so you can get into the truth. How about fact checkers? Those are to turn us into a falsehood politics era, an era of truthlessness. And in fact, it's the number one issue as we approach this election. What is true? And so many people are having such a hard time getting through that their I am, their sovereignty, they don't know what to do with it. Who are they going to, in America, our sovereignty is our vote, right? In our constitutional limited republic, we get to vote. And that is our I am, stating what we think is true, beautiful, and good. The best that we can get between the candidates. Unfortunately, right now, that's being assaulted. And in a little mini war of all against all, we seem to see that sovereignty, whether it's your body with pharmaceuticals and EMF and 5G emission, whether it's your soul through the insanity that we see through the cancel culture and through all these other crazy things that people throw out as ideologies that basically make you so confused you get psychotic. And then the good, who knows what's good? I mean, really? Is paying your taxes a good thing? What do they use it for? Do we even know where it goes? So the I am, the sovereignty, is the issue, whether it's body, soul, or spirit. It comes back to exactly what you said, finding the good.
Yeah, I knew that you'd come up with something. This is kind of a little spontaneous broadcast we're doing here, and Douglas and I, we talk so much. We don't really need a rehearsal or a script, and so consequently, it's yes, I said consequently again. And so consequently, what we have here is something that is bubbling up now that we're 53 days ahead of some of the biggest decisions in the history of mankind. You know, it's amongst them definitely, because here we have a possibility of a total revamping of constitutional governance, or the alternative, a quasi totalitarian corporate, whatever it is, of the few being in charge of the many by eliminating the people that are in the middle. And so that's what's going on, and a lot of the people that are in possession of whatever power they might have is bought off. You know, it's like the 12 pieces of gold all over again. You know, and for those that are not susceptible to that, have been blackmailed for whatever dealings they're ashamed of that would undermine their own existence. And so we're definitely living in a world of mirage, and given a clear understanding of the Constitution, and one of the best sources I know of that's contemporary is the book Saving the Constitution by Richard Pryor, Richard Proctor, yeah, Richard Pryor, Richard Proctor, PhD, and that's a wonderful, wonderful book, just to bring people up on an understanding of what it means to be an American, and why the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence are inspired documents. Were they ever to really come to fulfillment, would be something that would be world historic. But there have been forces impinging upon that since the inception of this country, and consequently, we've been beneath the shackles of the bankers since before the American Revolution. And one of the best presentations of that out there is Bill Still's The Secret of Oz, a documentary made some years back, which does a great job of laying out the historical sequence of events that have led to the basic debt servitude and which we are serving under at this time. And so that consequently, do you want to be in a country where you're governed by a representative government, or do you want to be ruled by a minority, a super minority of elites? And that's what it amounts to. And the power has been given to central banking to be able to override national sovereignty. And Trump really threw a wrench right in the spokes of that. One of the first things he did when he became president is to pull out of the TTP and all these other globalist operations that we were about to move beneath, and lose our national sovereignty, not to mention what individual sovereignty we may have. And so now we're experiencing pressure on individual sovereignty coming from state governors, mayors, and all of that, attempting to enforce whatever powers that they perceive to have. But the challenge at this point is really the 14th Amendment, because within the 14th Amendment, it implements certain powers against insurrection, and that's really what we're looking at here. As much as people are trying to not go in that direction, they're almost forcing us to go there by their stated goals of not accepting the results of the election, no matter what happens, and all this kind of drum beating that's going on from the left, and in their efforts to try and get us to become part of the vision of Henry Kissinger. That he proclaimed that this is the century, the China century. The 21st century is the century of China, and you look at it and you go, what in the world have we gotten into while we're all busy attending sporting events and entertainment and running around trying to raise families and make a living? Meanwhile, all these schemers have been building this international superstructure with leading figures like Bill Gates, George Soros, and Sir Geoffrey Patty and Lord Mark Malloch Brown, and all this strangeness that's coming out of the Privy Council in London, and with the Jesuit Pope. And there's a whole cast of characters. You say, who are you and how did you get in here? But you see, you have to understand that the prince of this world has a lot of tools at his disposal. And to try and understand the challenges that are going on, it's being crucified on the world cross is really the human experience. And Plato refers that the world soul has been crucified on the world cross. And so what does that mean? It's like the dwelling at the crux of space and time. And that's where we are. And this drama, we're here for a reason. And this is part of our development to go through these types of experience. And Rudolf Steiner, in one of his deepest lecture cycles, which is Eternal and Transient Elements, the Cosmic Past of Humanity and the Mystery of Evil, is something that's a cycle of 16 lectures that he gave. And it's almost too much when you read it, because he gives you such a clear picture of the dynamic that's expressing in the world. And for examples, of materialism, which is the great opponent of our endeavor, is Marxism, Karl Marx, and John Stuart Mill. And see, John Stuart Mill wrote the book on liberty. I have it right here somewhere. And he also wrote a preface to the famous set on democracy. And so consequently, people look to him as being a great light to be able to achieve what we're looking for. But you have to understand that his viewpoint is entirely within the realm of what he described as utilitarianism, so that it doesn't really imply any kind of spiritual essence as being at its backbone. It's just like, well, it just stands to reason that it's good for business if we let this experiment and freedom go forward, because people are going to be more creative, which is, it's hard to argue with that. And he's really a brilliant individual. But the fatal flaw that Rudolf Steiner points out is that ideas that are based in materialism ultimately resolve in conflict. And that's the real challenge.
Well, yes, and ism. Anytime you say ism, I get all worried, but I do want to underscore what you said earlier, which is I'll say it more like the way that Benjamin Franklin was saying it. We may think we have a democracy or a constitutional republic, but can we keep it? This is an experiment, and it is the greatest experiment in sovereignty, national sovereignty, ever in human history. So let's, for me, I look back to the ancient times. What's sovereignty? First off, to be sovereign as an individual, or you to join a state or a county or whatever in the nation, whatever. But as an individual, let's go back to caveman time. Okay, who was sovereign? The person who kept the fire in the cave. That's who was sovereign. The person who actually had the ability, and who was that? That was the women. Women before 2101 BC. It's hard to find anything but matriarchal societies, and they seldom ever had walls or even words for shields or spears or anything weapon-oriented, because war wasn't invented until after that, and the matriarchy was supplanted by the patriarchy. And this is the type of creep that happens to steal your sovereignty. That's the reason I'm making this as an example. So then what happened? Well, it went from the women holding all the wealth, and oftentimes, even to this very day, they wear it around their neck. The wealth of the family in coins is often worn by the highest matriarch in the family. And in many, many, many cultures, she was, of course, the sovereign of the home. She owned the home and owned the ground. No one owned the ground, but where the home was. And then she understood that the sovereignty of life came from leaving the earth sovereign instead of abusing it, trying to take the power away from it, take the truth, the beauty, the goodness of the earth. And what did they do with it? We got priest kings. Oh, they're dandy. So you either had kings who believed that they had a divine right of kings, that they were supposedly leading us as our sovereign because they were connected to the divine, the good. Well, we can see through history that didn't work out very well. And they also had the priests, and they seldom refer to the priestesses, but anything the priest knew they got from the priestesses. And so you have the priests, and pretty soon you have a separation between the sovereignty of the political, cultural, economic, and then the sovereignty of the ecclesiastic, those connected to the divine, the priests, who then were even higher than the sovereign. So the Pope got to tell kings what to do. It's kind of hard to find a pope that was really as holy and spiritual as they wish they would be. And our current Jesuit pope is probably one of the worst in history. So you get to see the sovereignty issue. The sovereignty issue then defaults down to monarchies and blood lineages. And if you look at British history, it is a series of British monarchical families killing each other and going back and forth across the channel to kill their relatives in Germany and France and in Brittany, and constant war. So when we talk about sovereignty in America, people might be shocked that we have given away our sovereignty, because the federal government doesn't really, they really don't follow the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. They have 56 agencies that are run by senior executive service members, which is like a military corps, oftentimes called generals, like the Attorney General of the Department of Justice. These are generals who are supposed to answer to the president, of course, as the chief executive, but also as the commander-in-chief. But do the 56 agencies answer to Trump? No. Why? Because this idea that our threefold government of executive, legislative, and judicial is threefold again, exactly as we talked about: the truth, the beauty, and the good. And it doesn't work unless there is a directing factor, and there is no directing factor. There's no I am in Washington, D.C. There's just me, just a whole bunch of me's. Nobody's saying, what about the people I'm representing? Because the 56 federal agencies that hold 4.5 million people, okay? The feds are 4.5 million people supposedly doing the work of the president, and that's not the case. So the senior executive service members are, as we have pointed out, Obama leftovers and Obama appointments. Obama got rid of 2,000 of them, 2,400 as soon as he came to power, replaced all of them, and then put thousands more in until he had 8,900 of his direct appointees during his 8 years of the 10,000 senior executive service members. In other words, the resistance, the Democratic appointees of Obama are a resistance that has taken away our sovereignty. And because they generally work for the way that money simply flows, which is to always pay your British tax, whether it's the Crown agents or OPEC or USAID or Serco or any of the British incursions into every aspect where wealth flows in America, we have to realize that the senior executive service members are simply the aristocratic extension of the British imperialists. Because when you say ism, Trotskyism, Marxism, Engel, Stalin, you can't hardly name an ism that didn't start by British fomenting it, usually in and around London. And they created socialism and Fabianism, and they created all of these isms. The Pilgrim Society is an ism, because these isms are ideologies that distract from their global plan. And their global plan is to extinguish your sovereignty.
Yes, it's interesting because not just because, but in part that the age in which we're living, the age of the consciousness soul, is very much central to the Anglo-Germanic peoples, according to the teachings of occult science. This is laid out, was first laid out publicly by Madame Blavatsky in her work, The Secret Doctrine, and then clarified by Rudolf Steiner in multitudinous works and lectures. He gave over 6,000 lectures, and there's more than 50 published books and articles and so forth. So consequently, in being able to understand what is going on is the crux of the matter, because so much of what culture has become is becoming a counter image, a shadow of culture. And I frequently make reference to Samuel Pepys, contemporary of many interesting people. He's way back in a couple hundred years ago. And what does he say? He says, culture is that which remains after you've forgotten what you set out to do. So that it's this actual kind of residue of human activity in its honest expression. But what we've been experiencing for the last 100 years or so is this whole idea of what they call mass culture, which really isn't culture. It's an expression of mercantile impulses, of commercial impulses, and really the nation par excellence of the whole mercantile commerce aspect of the world is the British Empire and the British Commonwealth. And so you see that, well, the British Empire, they don't exist anymore. Well, no, they've morphed. They've become an economic empire. And so consequently, they're still there. They never went away. They still are behind our financial system. I mean, our Federal Reserve fiat currency is created by our central bank, and they won't even let us know who owns the central bank, although it's called the Federal Reserve. It's neither federal nor do they hold any reserves. It's merely a place where the international bankers or banksters can control the creation of currency. Entirely unnecessary to create currency through debt. Bill Still's video that I made mention earlier, The Secret of Oz, lays that all out completely. and it's quite fascinating because you go back to Trump's early days in the White House, and he brought in a picture of Andrew Jackson, who's, he might have mixed reviews because of certain ways he dealt with things, but he was the guy that took on the international banks. And the War of 1812, no matter what they might tell you, it was ultimately a war over currency and the principles of banking and all of that. And so he was attempting to bring back to the United States control of its financial markets because essentially, and a lot of these people, they're out there going, boy, if we could just go back to the gold standard. No, no, no. And it's the secret of Oz. And if you look at the movie, she's wearing red slippers, which is really throwing you off the track because in the original book, they were silver slippers. And that particularly is in reference to the banking system. But people don't know that. But L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz, it was meant to be an allegory about the financial institutions, and that the Wizard of Oz is the secret cabal that working behind the scenes in control of had control over the yellow brick road, and which she walked down with her silver slippers. And it's interesting to note, though, that really, if you go back to some of the healthiest economic eras in the history of man, going back to the early with the tear sticks in Britain that they created tremendous posterity, and you go back to the Roman Republic. Uh, Nations have a right to be able to create their own currency. And it's not necessary to back it up with gold or silver. You could tag the value of the currency to the relative basis of the price of silver and gold. But the value of a currency is entirely in the real world tied into the robustness of the economy, and that's what's really holding it together. And which is interesting because if you look today and you look at all the indicators that people like to work with in the markets, they have a really hard time understanding why we're doing as good as we are based upon all these so-called leading indicators and all of that. And there's been many pundits that go out there and they're trying to put forward this whole idea of using gold-based currency as a way to resurrect it. Actually, the resurrection of the U.S. and thereby the world economy is that we could bring out actual. Right now, we have the Federal Reserve notes, fiat currency created through debts. We could come out with the Treasury notes that are just put out, which are lawful currency as defined in the Constitution. That Congress has the right to issue currency. They don't need to use debt as an anchor for creating the currency. They can just create it, and that's really an interesting challenge. And Bill Stills, in recent conversations, has made the point that we could be effectively retiring our debt to 500 billion a year by gradually introducing treasury notes into the economy. And all these trillions of dollars of debt, we can whittle it down to where we get to the point and just take the remainder and call it odious debt and wipe it off the books, like the way Thomas Jefferson did. And so there's more than one way to skin a cat. But see, we got stuck beneath all this nefarious dealings because even though we defeated the army of Britain in the Revolutionary War, and the army surrendered, but that doesn't mean the banks surrendered. See, and that's what people don't understand is that these were crown colonies. There's various corporate entities here, and there was a tremendous amount of debt that had been built up through these institutions, and it became necessary at that time to be able to figure out how to structure this debt so that it wouldn't destroy our economy. And we owe that a lot to Alexander Hamilton and to John Jay. They were the ones that dealt with that scenario. But we're still paying the piper on decisions that they made way back then. And Trump President Trump can judiciously move aside from some of these bad decisions that have been made, and he actually is aware of the things that I'm talking about. I know that through conversations that I've had with mutual associations. So this is an interesting time to live, at the very least.
Oh, absolutely. I like the fact that you went back to them being merchants because, Eustace Mullins says in his book, The World Order, that all the original bankers started off as merchants, dry good merchants. And he lists them all and you go, whoa, it's a very small group of people. And they often change their names and they often work through proxies. And so recently we have been focused a lot on the fact that the Rockefeller wealth was created by the Rothschild three banks in America that manipulated oil prices so that he was able to buy oil for a fraction of what everyone else was, and he got a monopoly. And why? Because they already had their monopolies in the railroads, but they were getting they had to pay full price for the oil they were using, and they said no, we'll just set up a guy, and his name is John David Rockefeller. He's not a genius. He's not he's a robber baron, but it isn't because he's a baron of industry. He never was. He was a proxy. Same thing with J.P. Morgan. Same thing with Warburg. Same thing with Kuhn Loeb, J. Henry Schroeder, Schiff, Kuhn and Loeb. You name them, they all go back to Frankfurt and the families that came out of Jugendstrasse, which was the street of the Jews, because the Rothschilds were the Bauers, and they lived in the same house with Jacob Schiff. And, they were all friends, and they were all literally, they would sell anything. But when they found out that they could start loaning money to the sovereign of a nation for war, that is when they took off and they became the bankers who are really, they are the robber barons. And the way they do it, we now, through the research, has shown that it's through what has been even testified in the Senate and the House in reports called interlocking directorships. So, for instance, Jeffrey Patty and Sir Mark Malloch Brown, who are in the Queen's Privy Council, they are on hundreds of corporations. They couldn't even make it to the meetings if they had to. So how is it that they direct those corporations? They don't. It's interlocking directorships so that there are decisions made with the central core that then affect literally hundreds and hundreds of the largest corporations, both in Britain and in America. And there's always a British control device, whether it's the golden share or something, for most major corporations in America, from RCA to CBS, every news agency, you name it, they get their piece of the pie. So what is interesting is to see that when you devolve your morality through lies and bad laws, it turns into an abnegation of morality. It turns into immorality, where immorality becomes the standard. For instance, with the British, they wanted the League of Nations. We wouldn't join it. So then they created the United Nations. And what is that? That is a group of agencies that do nothing but lie about every major aspect going on the earth, whether it's the World Health Organization, whether it's education through UNESCO, whether it's the World Bank, whether it's the International Monetary Fund, whether it's you name it, they want to control it. Now, that doesn't sound right, does it? That means it takes away all the sovereignty of the world. Well, they just did that with the pharmaceutical vaccine war, where the World Health Organization, using their very slim definition of a pandemic, were able to suggest that there is a pandemic and the way to treat it. And if you followed the way that the World Health Organization said to treat it, and you used intubation of people who started to have pneumonia-like symptoms in their lung because of COVID-19, then you killed them. The study just done in New York, 8,900 of 10,000 people looked at were killed by the ventilator that was recommended by the World Health Organization. So that's a lie. So they control you through education, through socialism. And look at Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization. He's an Ethiopian communist Marxist who loves China. Why is he in control of America? That's why Trump hacked his head off. That's why Trump stopped funding the Blue Hats, the peacekeeping force that never has kept peace anywhere from the United Nations. That's why he's getting us out of the World Trade Organization completely, because of Chinese control. So the what is the United Nations? That is the British attempt to control all of our thinking. And it runs, of course, they wanted to get the climate accord to turn into the special drawing rights of the International Monetary Fund to become a new currency. Well, they've been trying to have a new currency that the Brits could control since the beginning of the United Nations, even the League of Nations and before. So that's the abnegation, that's the immorality, that is the dark side of thinking. The dark side of feeling is the Pope saying that all religions are the same, that Jesus and Muhammad are the same. He said that. I mean, he just destroyed every single doctrine, every dogma, everything. He has destroyed the entire Catholic Church because he's a Jesuit, and he believes in basically that what the Jesuits believe is a terrible thing. They believe in the second coming of Christ being physical, and he thinks it's supposed to happen now. That's the reason he joined with the World Organization of Religions that is going to supposedly offer one world religion, and he will be the head of it. And this was suggested for 2017 when Hillary was supposed to take over, but it didn't happen. So then you have, of course, the United States being used by the Five Eyes Agreement with the British to get us into war after war after war, because the United States is the military is the abnegation of good. It's war. Instead of life, it's death. Instead of helping, it's killing. And we have been led by the nose since the American Revolution, thinking that we had won that. We didn't. And then the War of 1812 was a banking war, exactly as you just pointed out. And we've been in a banking war where the bankers and the brokers have controlled our economy through stock markets and through a fake market, capitalistic market system, which is fake because the U.S. Fed, as you pointed out, is complete nonsense. So the abnegation of thinking is done through the United Nations. The abnegation of feeling is done through false religions. And the abnegation of the good is done through the United States military and anyone else who joins with us to stand against the superpower that Kissinger said we have to be. And to contain the world, we have to make sure everyone below us, and there's can only be one superpower, and everyone below us has to be at war at all times. And that's the CIA's job, which is, again, interlocking directorships. It's like musical chairs. These people from year to year go from heading the biggest bank in the world to being on the CIA for a few years, to going to the Department of Justice, to going out to hedge funds, to going to work for China. This is a standard protocol for the very people like Pompeo, like William Barr, like John Brennan. Just look at their history. Comey, Robert Mueller. All you have to do is look at where they worked, and it is absolutely insider trading. It's basically the inside government control, senior executive service, going out to work for the corporate world and being paid. You know, Comey made $10 million in the year before he became the head of the FBI. $10 million, and that was a bad year for him. Working for, of course, the corrupt Mellon Foundation and the same corrupt bank that Robert Mueller had worked for before. So you said to me years ago, the world is controlled by the Vatican, by the City of London, and by Washington, D.C. basically being used by the globalists. It took me a long time and the work with the miners and Michael McKibben, but we have laid all that out and even gone further than Eustace Mullins by showing that it's the Pilgrim Society. I don't know if I'll go to the next step of what Eustace Mullins says is the inside of the inside of the inside group, but we've pointed in that direction, and maybe when we have the facts a little bit better, we'll lay the hammer on that one. But it's the reality exactly as you said. These are a small group of people through banks, through intermarriages, through control of those three focal points of the Vatican, City of London, and Washington, D.C., that control the world. And it has nothing to do with American sovereignty. These aren't Americans. These are multinationalists. These are anti-nationalists. These are globalists. And when I say globalists, only because you're videotaping this do I not turn to my trash can and spit. Because when you say globalists, you're saying depopulationists, eugenists, war creators, bankers they'll kill you to take, but they don't want you dead, really. They put a tax on any flow of money. They believe they own a certain percentage of every human on the face of the earth, but they do need to control us so that they can make sure that that money goes straight into their pocket without any difficulties whatsoever. So I want to thank you because years ago you pointed me to Eustace Mullins, I think when he used to talk to him on the phone and order his books. And he's right. He didn't give enough evidence for me in those days, and we found the evidence now. And it is oftentimes along the paths that come from the conversations that we have that we can find some of the loose threads that are hidden that caused the confabulation and that caused the obfuscation and caused the ones in control to be behind that curtain. In other words, the Wizard of Oz, just as you pointed out.
Yes, good old Eustace Mullins. You know, he was the primary source. It's his whole story is interesting in and of itself because he was a writer and he had found out that Ezra Pound was the famous inscrutable Ezra Pound was basically imprisoned in an insane asylum for which he was stuck for some 15 years. But the reason being that consorting with the enemy because he had been living in Italy and he expressed certain sentiments regarding Mussolini that didn't meet with the approval of the brass. And, you know, in retrospect, you have to understand what was going on in Italy at the time and the whole idea of the communist threat that has become so effective. All you got to do is listen to my friend Leo Zagami. He'll explain that to you. But Ezra Pound was really the master of troubadour poetry, and he was able to read the Provençal languages and the medieval languages of Europe, and translating poems from the troubadours and trouvères and minnesingers and that whole tradition. And he ended up becoming quite a figure and totally bombastic. I mean, the guy was really a trip. If you look at some of the outfits, the guy would strut around. He was remarkable in and of himself. He was gallantly handsome, and when he would edit somebody's writing, they would win the Nobel Prize for Literature. And he did that for maybe 5 or 6 different people, all of whom you've heard of, you know, James Joyce and William Butler Yeats. And I mean, you just go down the list. It's just fun to look at that and go, well, why didn't he ever win the Nobel Prize for Literature? But he should have, seeing as how he helped that happen for so many of the leading people at that time. And but he was dwelling in this insane asylum where they'd stuck him for being a traitor to the U.S. while he was living in Italy and doing broadcasts against what was going on with the communists in Italy at the time. And Italy was trying to make its transition. And you have to understand what we have in America is unique. And it's made even clearer by looking at what he had gone through, because we have a constitutional republic. The impulse of the republic is something that really it developed out of Greek thought and in the early stages of the Roman Empire, but then it was overridden with the authoritarian impulse of the emperor of Rome and all that kind of stuff. And when Napoleon brought it forward, and then he had himself declared emperor. So the risk, the temptation is too great, and consequently, people fail when given the opportunity to make it succeed. So this is a very difficult experiment that we're involved in. But anyways, to continue back to our story, Eustace Mullins was a writer who went to Ezra Pound to get some hints about how to write, because he wanted to write novels and poetry, and so he went to find that he was about 15 miles away from Ezra Pound. And so he went to see him. And Ezra Pound asked him, he said, "Can you do me a favor? I have a friend over at the Library of Congress, and I would like you to go there and do some research for me on the banking system. Can you do that?" He said, "Yeah, sure." He'd do anything to get help from Ezra Pound. And so he began a journey that continued through his whole life of unearthing the actual documents that described what had happened with the creation of the Federal Reserve in Jekyll Island down off the coast of the South, and all the various factors that were involved in that. Where I part company with Eustace Mullins and Ezra Pound is in their interpretation that they tend to make it like it's some kind of Jewish thing. And while it's true that the bankers that were involved were Jewish, you can't really consider them. And in our further researches, you see that there's this whole Sabbatean thread running through the banking community, and that's antinomial. They were thrown out of Judaism, hundreds of years ago. And so they're excommunicated from Judaism. So you can't call them Jews, because if they're Sabbateans, they're not Jews. And they're Sabbatean Catholics. They are running around the Vatican as we speak. And there are Sabbatean Muslims focused in Turkey. And so there's this whole undercurrent. And what that Sabbatean impulse is, instead of following the Ten Commandments, you want to violate the Ten Commandments in a quest for power. And so that's what we're looking at here when you get into international banking. And you should not make the mistake of thinking that it's something inherently Jewish, because it's not. It's Sabbatean. And that's something that people really have a hard time understanding, because getting into some of the things that have been discovered about the Sabbatean impulse that really in English-speaking world began with Gershom Schlom and his researches into Kabbalah. And he wrote a book, Sabtai Tzvi, that was published, that was the first major work really published in English about Sabtai Tzvi, who was born in 1666 in Salonika in Turkey. And that whole impulse was even further darkened through the Polish Jakob Frank. And well, I have some of that stuff around here, but I don't want to start digging around in books. But the point is that that's where I seriously part company with Eustace Mullins, and unfortunately passed away before I was able to correct his line of thinking, because it will be done. All you have to do is look at the report that came out from the Dutch banker regarding his acquisition of power within banking would require him to sacrifice a child. So that's what we're looking at. There's an inner core that he said he dare not speak about, Eustace dare not speak about, and that's what he's talking about. He's talking about these nefarious Sabbatean cabal that's behind the inner dark workings. Remember, it's the prince of this world that we're talking about.
Yes, I'd just say that they're worshippers of mammon, worshippers of money, worshippers, and that they're involved in usury, and without using the year of Jubilee. So, if you're going to loan money and you're going to charge money on it, well, right there, the person's kind of, they're working on credit, aren't they? And that's what you just kind of started this thing off with. Why are we, what is this thing with credit? So I agree with you, especially with Eustace Mullen's limitations. I did not know until a few days ago that he had done so many different writings on so many different topics. And so I looked at a lot of them. And what I found is that, exactly as you're saying, the Sabbateans, which, were given a choice. They could have been Jewish, Christian, Muslim. Same thing with the Khazarian Jews, supposedly, in the mythological version of that story, that they were, this fierce nation that had to be subdued, so they had to choose. What do you want to be? You want to be Christian? You want to be Muslim? You want to be Jews? They chose Jews, and supposedly they entered into the Jewish community and have controlled the economics ever since then. Well, that's not true, because if you look at the Rothschilds, Bowers, of course, they are Jewish, and his 5 sons, and the way that they ran their empire was, the way that a good capitalist would, ruthlessly, following the corporate example of the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company and the German Hansa League. So, really all they were doing is corporatism for their own personal interests. So can we really fault them on that? I don't know if we can. So what they want to do is have their corporate lineage continue. And what Eustace Mullins is so good at with Who's Who, and with his research, is saying who married who and then got the money. For instance, the proof. So the Anti-Defamation League can't come anywhere near us because we're not saying a word about anti-Semitism. We're saying that a family called Bauer, who really didn't practice Judaism, then were the bankers who supported a lot of other bankers. And they happen to be Jewish born, but it doesn't mean they're Jewish practicing. And so I'm not insinuating any such thing. For instance, what you need to do is what Eustace Mullins does. Go and see who they married. Because in those days, who you married determined what corporation you were going to lead and what power you'd be given. Because, for instance, Lord Rosebery, who years ago you kept saying to me, look into Lord Rosebery. He inherited the largest money of any Rothschild at any time through marriage and through his mother, and he didn't earn a bit, and he wasn't Jewish. He actually married a Catholic, and he's like, what? And then Lord Pirbright, another Rothschild. Wait a second. Wait. What are you saying? The most powerful of the Rothschilds aren't Rothschilds, and they're not practicing Jews in any sense of the word, and they're certainly not Khazarians, and they're not Sabbateans, and they're not political Zionists. Well, who are they? They're self-interest bankers who have their interlocking directorships and make sure that they marry well, and that their little insider group knows by the husband turning to the wife at night and whispering something in her ear, and the next day she calls her 3 sisters, and the 4 biggest banks in America have all just made an insider agreement, which controls our lives, by the way. So when the Brits came to America, they worked through Peabody. They were all these people I've named. And at the same time that the German Kaiser Wilhelm was using Max Warburg as his personal banker, we were using his brother to create the Federal Reserve here in the United States of America on communist lines, which the Bretton Woods Agreement was led by Harry Dexter White, later convicted as a communist, and his 2 associates, also communists, one of whom went to, Averell Harriman, E.H. Harriman's son, who owned more railroad stock than anyone can count. Averell Harriman lived in Russia controlling the Bolsheviks. And when Rockefeller goes there, they call him the prince of their banks. and they treat him as royalty. Any Rockefeller going to Russia to this very day is treated as royalty. Oh, that's right. And George H.W. Bush and his baby Bush and his brother were part of Riggs Bank, Velmet Bank, Brown's Brother Bank, and then Brown's Brother Harriman Bank, and they ripped off Russia twice. And Prescott Bush, Daddy Bush's daddy, was charged for his Union Bank affiliation with the Hitler. They were hand in glove. The British banks were supporting Hitler. The American banks were supporting Hitler. They were all supporting Hitler. The only person who seemed to have been against Hitler that I've found is Winston Churchill. And he basically conducted the war almost single-handedly, controlling the Americans through General Sarnoff and all of our other generals. Also, the Brits created the OSS, which created the CIA. And as you pointed out, and as Eustace Mullins points out, all the rich banking families take their idiot son or daughter and put them into the mainstream media to be their propaganda megaphone, and the CIA. So that's the reason the CIA always gets caught doing stupid stuff, because the people running it are placed there, and they are the town idiot for the family that has been sent to the CIA to keep their interests guarded, their globalist interests guarded out of a United States supposedly federal agency, which it is not. It is completely rogue and should be closed, exactly as John F. Kennedy said.
Well, that sums up a lot, doesn't it?
You should know better than to leave the microphone near my mouth.
Well, that's the thing. Something that helps explain a lot of this is the concept of picking winners, and that's what they do. And so you look down the list of a lot of these companies, and you go like, well, for example, a former head of NSA just took a job at Amazon. It's like, what's up with that? Okay, and you go, why did Jeff Bezos, what did he do to get where he is, to have proprietary hold on the marrow of the U.S. and even the global economy, and to have use of Michael McKibben's software development of being able to develop a website that can literally deal with millions of people. It was created by Leader Technology and our friend Michael McKibben. And then you have, with Facebook, with the Yuck Zuck, and all these characters, you look at them and you go, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture. When you look at it, or even like Bill Gates, even, it's like, no. It's he was the guy that they said, okay, you're in charge. You go over there and you're in charge. And they let him be rich and they let him do all this stuff, but they're not in control, not really. So to get behind these people that are the figureheads of all of these weird corporations, these various entities and all of that, you could say that Bill Gates is a science officer of the deep state. He's the visible science officer. No, he's not. He's not the USAP. It's what's called the USAP. That's the Undisclosed Secret Access Project or program. And you have secret access programs in government, and even more secret than that is the unacknowledged secret access program. And it's the people dwelling within that organization that 99.99% of the people don't even know there is such a thing. And so that's behind this, and how we get there. It's very strange. Like, for example, the revelations that now have come out in further details from Bob Woodward's book about General Mattis. about how he was really essentially leading a coup against Trump while he was supposed to be serving at the behest of the president, right? So what's up with that? So that there's this factional struggle going on in all the institutions. Very early on, Douglas and I had given a presentation regarding the 17th letter of the alphabet that I don't want to say because I don't want to get this blocked. But we all know it's a single letter. And we did an outline of that whole idea of intelligence and what is this thing and the factions within it. But it's starting to look as if it's even more complex, which we figured anyways, that there's factions within factions. So there's really literally a granulation going on right now on the institutional level to where people are having to make decisions about who they're going to serve. And a lot of them are like, well, they want to like stay right here because what if these guys win? I want to be able to jump over there and say, hey, I was with you all along. Or if the other guys, it's the same thing. So it's like they're like these sock puppet characters that are in these positions. And you bring up the senior executive service. Yeah, I used to beat you over the head. You got to look into the senior executive service, the most important part of our government that nobody's ever heard of. You know, it's like close to 10,000 civilian generals that are supposed to be serving the interest of the president and all of the various organizations in the executive branch, but yet the president, because of the rules of senior executive service, he can't fire them. It's like, are you kidding me? And Janet Reno rewrote the rules of the senior executive service to give them certain, you call them plenipotentiary powers. I mean, they're literally the equivocation of the Privy Council within the U.S. government. And so there's a group of lawyers, several hundred lawyers at the top of them that is very much akin to the members of the Privy Council in England. And it's interesting because when I run into British people, they try to run that thing by me about how the Queen is a figurehead. It's like, well, I don't go there, you know, because it gets too confusing for people to understand that the Privy Council is running the British Empire. The economic empire is what it essentially is, out of the city of London, which is a city-state like the Vatican, like Washington, D.C. is a city-state. It's independent of the U.S. on a level of technical legalese and corporate governance. So that consequently, in looking at it more closely, the more you start finding out these very bizarre attributes that would entail. I mean, who'd have thought that the basis of the U.S. currency is birth certificates?
Right, right, and it's just a proof of the lawlessness going on with the birth certificate, because we have Barry Mumbarka, who called himself Barry Soetoro, who then called himself Barack Hussein Obama and claimed he was from Kenya when he was from Indonesia, and yet we accept it. Now we have Kamala Harris trying to tell us that she's African American when in fact she's Jamaican and Indian. So we live in this falsehood age, and it's very, very clear that you can see the war, because we have tracked it recently to show that the bankers control things to their foundations, who give money to non-government organizations, who are their political activists on the street, who literally will go out and burn cities down for them because they're paying them to do so, and will actually have, literally as puppets on a string, the entire Congress, Senate, and House, who then passes laws that allow and stand back and allow laws like, we're going to release the prisoners from the jail because of COVID-19, murderers who are going to go out and be paid by NGOs to go burn down our cities. And you say, how is that possible? Because it's so ensconced, it's been going on for so long, that we don't even notice that we're in a pandemic war created by the pharmaceutical companies. So stand back and say, how can this be? People get angry. look up the law. And what you'll find is you have no sovereignty. The pharmaceutical companies, by law, have the sovereignty of your blood. And there's very little you can do about it if you have a child who needs an immunization to go to school, or soon they'll probably be stopping us on the street or coming into our homes to make sure that we have the vaccinations and that they're being contact traced. Matter of fact, every iPhone and every Android now has that on the phone, and they're being traced. It isn't turned on, you may not know it, but it's there with your updates. So it's already happening in colleges. That's how they're able to say, okay, you 11 people were at this place at this time, and they're kicking you out of college. Same thing they're using at the colleges that I've seen in our own local area. They know exactly who you are, where you are. They're keeping track of it. And we have pointed out that that Internet of Things desire is the globalist desire to digitally control, through remote control and aggressively, all human interaction. It doesn't matter what type, social, economic, religious, location, everything. And it will all soon, if they have their way, be centralized. Why? Because they're trying to speed up humanity's development. At a point in the distant future, there will be a war of all against all, and we will see the apocalyptic story come as humanity is explicating it before our eyes. We're already beginning to see major parts of that now. But remember, the end of that story is a happy ending. So if you are afraid of the apocalypse, you probably didn't read to the end, because it's a joyous story unless you happen to be a goat instead of a sheep. But that's actually from Matthew. But when the decision comes, it depends on what side you're on. If you're on the good side, you have a really, really nice life ahead of you. If you're on the bad side, you're in the war of all against all. And be careful who you follow, because you might be cast into a second pit of hell that, will have to burn off all of your negativity before you can ascend. Well, that's what we have here before us. Everyone thinks that it's either Noah's flood, we're either the flood time, or this is the end of time, and it is the war of all against all. So every person in the world, by a little man named Mr. Tedros, who we don't even, no one can seem to pronounce his last name, a little Ethiopian man running the World Health Organization, has taken control of the whole world, and nobody seems to even notice it. But that's how bureaucracies work. They become so ensconced that no decision is ever made. The only decision ever made in the bureaucracy of the SES is no decision will be made. That's what they do. They slow walk us to the cliff so that the Cecil Rhodes plan of British imperialism, which is, unfortunately, it's hegemony, and unfortunately, it is white supremacy, but it's much worse than that. It's worse than even the Nazis and their Aryan obsession. It is the most ruthless control of the world to try to get rid of most of the world so that the elite can have the world to themselves. Well, it's not going to work, because there's just too many of us now. And because of Michael McKibben's invention of social media, we can have these talks and we can tell people, stop the fear, take your mask off. Your neighbor isn't there to kill you. And if they don't have their mask on, that does not mean that they are personally coming after you to kill you, because there is no such thing. We shouldn't go there, because I'll get all worked up. But right now, when people are saying there's only 9,000 confirmed deaths of COVID that is directly attributed to COVID, remember that most of them were through, it's not true that it was just through COVID, because there's no such thing, but they almost all had pneumonia, and they were intubated with a ventilator, and that's what killed them. I know I was put on one of those for pneumonia a few years ago, and it is the most horrible experience you can possibly have. How anyone survives that, I don't know, but it does save people who have double pneumonia. But it kills people who have COVID or coronavirus, especially if it is an upper infection in your lungs. That was part of the plan. Why don't we hang Mr. Tedros for his criminal activity? Why don't we take Fauci, who now has flip-flopped 18 times, I'm keeping count, 18 times we've been given opposite information from the National Institute of Health through Fauci, who isn't even an expert in the area. And the CDC has given us no help whatsoever. And so Trump ended our association with the World Health Organization. He's questioned the CDC. And someday, as soon as we get rid of this pandemic, and that's the next thing that the Americans Aim for Truth is focused on, the Americans for Innovation, is we're going to show you how to get rid of the pandemic immediately. But we're going to save that until we get that together. But I so appreciate you inviting me on the show today and having a conversation about something so sacred as sovereignty, because without sovereignty, we have nothing. We have no body, we have no soul, we have no spirit. So to go back to your 3 watchwords that you began this with, develop your thinking into imagination, not fantasy, but a flowing form of higher archetypical thought that connects you with literally the beings that are the intelligent design of the universe. And turn your heart into a chalice of inspiration, that you are open and listening to the divine world and not trying to use a sovereign or the federal government or anyone else to determine your sovereignty, but your own heart. And with your good, do what my friend the Dalai Lama and his teacher, Gelek Rinpoche, said. Be kind. That's all you need to do.
Well said. Yeah, Gaelic. He was wonderful. May he rest in peace. Yeah, as the Dalai Lama said to us one time, he said, "If there is a lake, the swans will come." And so, what people need to be doing is to be preparing a lake so that the swans can come. And Steiner had made the point that the relationship to the supersensible is developed through the activities that you put forward to achieve that. Through achieving that, you gain the attention of the hierarchical beings. And through them taking notice of you, that's the scaffold on which your supersensible development unfolds. It's much like when Goethe said, the eye was created by light to receive light. And so consequently, there's an active role that you have to play. People keep wanting to wait and like somebody's going to fix something for them. Well, guess what? You're center stage, and it has to do with the development of that grail impulse to be a conscious, willing, and free receptacle of the spiritual inspirations. And it led me to write 2 books that I'll mention now that people are finding helpful. The Arcana of the Grail Angel, with a foreword by Douglas Gabriel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. That's some 640 pages. And my second book is a meditative tool, The Arcana of Light on the Path. In both of them, I include the cosmological diagrams that can help you sort all this out. And Douglas himself and his wife Tyla are, oh, by the way, my books are available on eBay. Don't try to get them on Amazon. Somebody's offering them for $2,000 for the second book, and that's a slender volume. So that's geez, that's a lot of money. I'm flattered. But anyways, Douglas and Tyla have written multiple works, and they're actually available. If you could give them some of the details regarding all the wonderful books that you and your wife Tyla have written together, it'd be very helpful to people.
Yes, all of our books are free in PDF form. You can get them by going to aim4, the number 4, aim4truth.com. And pardon me? .org, aimfortruth.org. The boss just corrected me. And there, because she does all this, all I do is flap my gums, So the books are available through PDF there for free if you search after them. It's called The Gospel of Sophia. Another one's called The Eternal Ethers. Another one's called The Eternal Curriculum. And the latest one is called The Queens of the Grail, I think, something to that effect. Anyway, all the books are in one place all together. And you can go to Amazon and get them for basically almost our cost to produce them, because we want them to go out to people and we want them to be free so that you can, really have what the myth of the internet is, free information that is going to help you in your ascension.
Excellent. Yes. So there's more than plenty available out there, and in any of you that feel moved to buy me a cup of coffee and help me stay awake and doing all my researches, you can go to paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And you can also go to my Twitter account at John Barnwell 888, and you can see the Crown Gate thread that I have parked at the top with literally, I think, 300 some different parts to it that helps explicate some of the research that we've been doing over the years and giving you the cast of characters and some of the plots and subplots to what's been going on a geopolitical level, much of which we didn't have the opportunity to explore because it's literally just a maze of interlocking pieces, and that's the challenge that President Trump is dealing with, is that this has been around so long. It's amazing that he's gotten done what he has, in spite of all the pressures against him and the unwillingness for people to move on decisions he makes, and so it's a real challenge for him to be able to serve the needs of the people. And I think at this time, what I want to do is don't forget to go to aimfortruth.org and Americans number 4 innovation, Americans for Innovation.blogspot.com, and you can access primary documents to support a lot of the points that we're making. And you can also go to the Rudolf Steiner Archive and access for free just thousands of Rudolf Steiner's lectures and then books and all kinds of things that are good. And you could maybe donate to help support the work that's done by our friend James Stewart, who's here in Michigan also and has been putting this whole thing together for a great many years. And so I want to thank you all for coming aboard. And so it's always wonderful to me to be able to have a conversation. I mean, I have conversations frequently with Douglas, but it's nice to be able to share it with the people out there, because so much of the ground that we cover has become so relevant for helping people understand the world in which we live today. So Douglas, I want to thank you again, and I want to thank your better half, Tyla, for all of her efforts.
Better 3/4.
Better 5/8, and
Better 5/8, yes. And I just want to thank you for helping fight the George Soros Purple Revolution here in America with the Second American Revolution, which is the Red Revolution of MAGA. And thank you so much for all that you do, because you are all over the place creating high-level effects that trickle down to many people all over the world. So thank you for your work.
thank you. And so on that note, may we all be blessed in the name of Christ. It's Yeshua El Shaddai, Jesus the Almighty.